Hello, everyone. Welcome to ORSAM Winter School. This is a great turnout that is awesome. My name is İsmail Sarı. I am a senior fellow at ORSAM, and I am an assistant professor of international relations at Ankara Hacı Bayram Veli University. I focus on Iranian foreign policy and American foreign policy. Today, I will try to talk about the tension between the US, Iran, and its effects on the Middle East. The tension between US and Iran started after the Iranian Islamic Revolution. As you know, they became ontological enemies in 1979, but there is no balance of power between US and Iran. So you know, US is a great power, Iran is not. So in order to be deterrent against US and its regional allies, Iran started to have proxies in the Middle East. There is a whole region known as the Shia Crescent and arc of Iranian influence. With large Shia populations reaching from Saudi Arabia to Lebanon, but Iran's so-called axis of resistance. First of all, I want to show a video. This is timeline. After I will continue. Look at this, please. I can say that after revolution, their relations entered detente confrontation crisis circle. Today, I want to focus their relations, US-Iran relations. After the terror attacks of 9/11, I want to show a video.
from threatening America or our friends and allies with weapons of mass destruction. Some of these regimes have been pretty quiet since September the 11th, but we know their true nature. North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror, while an unelected few repress the Iranian people's hope for freedom. Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. This is a regime that has already used poison gas to murder thousands of its own citizens, leaving the bodies of mothers huddled over their dead children. This is a regime that agreed to international inspections, then kicked out the inspectors. This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. By seeking weapons of mass destruction, these regimes pose a grave and growing danger. They could provide these arms to terrorists, giving them the means to match their hatred. They could attack our allies or attempt to blackmail the United States. In any of these cases, the price of indifference would be catastrophic. We will work closely with our coalition to deny terrorists and their state sponsors the materials, technology, and expertise to make and deliver weapons of mass destruction. We will develop and deploy effective missile defenses to protect America and our allies from sudden attack. And all nations should know America will do what is necessary to ensure our nation's security. We'll be deliberate, yet time is not on our side. I will not wait on events while dangers gather. I will not stand by as peril draws closer and closer. The United States of America will not permit the world's most dangerous regimes to threaten us with the world's most destructive weapons.
As you know, after the 9/11 terrorist attack on the United States, President George Bush described Iraq, North Korea, and Iran as axis of evil. Bush blamed Iran for making weapons of mass destruction. So the nuclear crisis between the US and Iran started after two secret nuclear facilities were found in Iran in 2002. In this time, it was expecting that US will attack to Iran after invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. President Bush could not bear consequences of a war with Iran, but nuclear crisis between US and Iran continued until nuclear deal. Look at this video, please.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not: a comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon. This deal demonstrates that American diplomacy can bring about real and meaningful change that makes our country and the world safer and more secure.
When look at the Obama term and US foreign policy toward Iran, the Arab Spring was a turning point for US foreign policy in Obama term. Arab Spring shifted a balance of power in the Middle East. US foreign policy towards the Middle East changed in the Arab Spring. So US-Iran strategy shifted because I could say that the US-Iran strategy depends on US the Middle East policy. So President Obama signed the nuclear deal with Iran to keep status quo safe in the Middle East. So Obama opened a way of Iran's expansion by signing the nuclear deal in 2015. Obama established the balance of conflict in the Middle East. I want to show that this video, what is Iran deal? Look at this, please.
The Iran nuclear deal, also known as the JCPOA, aims to limit Iran's nuclear program in return for lifting nuclear-related sanctions on Iran. It was signed in 2015 between Iran and the permanent members of the UN Security Council, plus Germany, after more than a decade of international negotiations. What are Iran's obligations under the accord? First, Iran has to reduce its uranium and plutonium stockpiles. Second, Iran also agreed to limit its uranium enrichment to 3.67% for 15 years, far from the 90% needed to develop a nuclear weapon. Third, Iran agreed to dismantle 2/3 of its installed centrifuges, as well as its heavy water reactor capable of producing weapon-grade plutonium. And finally, Iran also agreed to the most rigorous inspections ever implemented by the International Atomic Energy Agency. What does Iran get in return? In return, the nuclear sanctions imposed by the EU, the UN, and the US are lifted. Is the deal working? According to the IAEA, the deal is working, and Iran has adhered to its nuclear obligations. As the IAEA Director General said this past March, as of today, I can state that Iran is implementing its nuclear-related commitments. US Defense Secretary Jim Mattis also said in a Senate hearing last October, I believe at this point in time, absent indications to the contrary, it is something that the president should consider staying with. Why does Trump think it's a terrible deal? Donald Trump thinks the Iran deal should have never been made. He doesn't like that some nuclear restraints will expire between 2026 and 2031. The Trump administration also says that the deal fails to address other concerns the US has with Iran, like its ballistic missile program and support for non-state actors in the region. Iran says the US has been implementing the deal in bad faith. For example, it has refused to issue licenses for the sale of civilian aircraft. What happens now that the US has withdrawn from the deal? The JCPOA could still live on if Europe is able to provide sufficient incentives for Tehran to remain in the deal, and if Tehran accepts the new situation. But if the deal collapses, Iran could ramp up its nuclear activity once again, or escalate tensions in the region against the US and its allies. And if Iran restarts its nuclear program, the US would be left with two options: use military force against Iran and risk a regional confrontation, or find a new agreement, going back to
Yes, in this point, I could say that offshore balancing is the basic tendency of US foreign policy rather than onshore balancing. The US evades direct military action against the regional challenger, and instead place it on the shoulders of the countries in the region. Iran included conflict area as it has more powerful and more self-confidence. The new strategy of Obama was working. Turkey and Iran faced each other in Syria. Saudi Arabia and Iran faced each other in Yemen. They made proxy war in there. So status quo was keep safe in the Middle East by signing nuclear agreement. But after Trump pull out of nuclear deal, please look at this video.
If I allowed this deal to stand, there would soon be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Everyone would want their weapons ready by the time Iran had theirs. The Iran deal is defective at its core. If we do nothing, we know exactly what will happen. In just a short period of time, the world's leading state sponsor of terror will be on the cusp of acquiring the world's most dangerous weapons. Therefore, I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. In a few moments, I will sign a presidential memorandum to begin reinstating US nuclear sanctions on the Iranian regime. We will be instituting the highest level of economic sanction. Any nation that helps Iran in its quest for nuclear weapons could also be strongly sanctioned by the United States. America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail. Finally, I want to deliver a message to the long-suffering people of Iran. The people of America stand with you. It has now been almost 40 years since this dictatorship seized power and took a proud nation hostage. Most of Iran's 80 million citizens have sadly never known an Iran that prospered in peace with its neighbors and commanded the admiration of the world. But the future of Iran belongs to its people. They are the rightful heirs to a rich culture and an ancient land, and they deserve a nation that does justice to their dreams, honor to their history, and glory to God. Iran's leaders will naturally say that they refuse to negotiate a new deal. They refuse, and that's fine. I'd probably say the same thing if I was in their position. But the fact is, they are going to want to make a new and lasting deal, one that benefits all of Iran and the Iranian people. When they do, I am ready, willing, and able. Great things can happen for Iran, and great things can happen for the peace and stability that we all want in the Middle East. There has been enough suffering, death, and destruction. Let it end now.
I think the starting point for this tension was May 2018, when the United States left the nuclear deal with Iran. And the reasons the Trump administration gave for leaving the nuclear deal. The first one was that the JCPOA didn't eliminate Iran's nuclear program completely. The second set of critique has to do with, in fact, that the deal didn't talk at all about proxies. And the third critique had to do with that it didn't deal with Iran's ballistic missiles program. It did talk about ballistic missiles in the context of their ability to carry nuclear warheads, but it didn't Iran's ballistic missiles program. So for those reasons, President Trump pull out of the nuclear deal. After the Secretary of State Pompeo declared 22 demands. I want to show a video about this. Look at, please.
Iran must declare to the IAEA full account of the prior military dimensions of its nuclear program, must stop enrichment, provide the IAEA with unqualified access to all sites throughout the entire country, must end its proliferation of ballistic missiles, release all U.S. citizens, end support to Middle East terrorist groups, respect the sovereignty of the Iraqi government, and permit the disarming, demobilization, and reintegration of Shia militias. Also end its military support for the Houthi militia, withdraw all forces under Iranian command throughout the entirety of Syria. We must end support for the Taliban and other terrorists in Afghanistan and the region, and cease harboring senior al-Qaeda leaders. And the IRG could force support for terrorists and militant partners around the world. And two, Iran must end its threatening behavior against its neighbors, many of whom are U.S. allies.
Well, he started off the speech trying to convince his audience of how bad Obama's deal was, claiming that its flaws put the whole world at risk and arguing that the JCPOA only postponed Iran's development of nuclear weapons. And now Pompeo also promised unprecedented financial pressure on Iran, warning that sanctions will not change until Iran changes and threatening that Iran will have to fight to keep its economy alive.
We will apply unprecedented financial pressure on the Iranian regime. The leaders in Tehran will have no doubt about our seriousness. These will indeed end up being the strongest sanctions in history when we are complete.
It's also worth mentioning that this economic pressure can only succeed if the EU also complies. However, the EU has already stated that it's satisfied with the existing deal, saying that more sanctions are unnecessary as it seeks to protect its companies that are doing business in Iran. But let's quickly break down some of his demands. Now, some of them had at least something to do with the previous Iran deal. For example, Pompeo demanded that Iran stop enriching uranium and never pre-process plutonium, and asked for access to all of Iran's nuclear sites. But these demands were not only part of the JCPOA, they were met by Iran, which was certified by the IAEA. Other demands Pompeo made had nothing to do with preventing Iran from acquiring nukes. These were random foreign policy demands, which included asking Iran to stop supporting Houthis in Yemen, demanding that Iran pulls out of Syria. But one highlight of the speech was when Pompeo accused Shia Iran of supporting Sunni extremist groups in Afghanistan. And apparently pressure will continue until Iranians change its government. So now America is blatantly telling the Iranian people what to do. Check out what he said.
At the end of the day, the Iranian people will decide the timeline. At the end of the day, the Iranian people will get to make a choice about their leadership. If they make the decision quickly, that would be wonderful. If they choose not to do so, we will stay hard at this until we achieve the outcomes that I set forward today.
So that could be interpreted as a call for regime change, which, unlike Pompeo's nuclear demands, wasn't part of the original deal. But all in all, it's unclear what the administration is looking to come out of this, but we'll just have to wait for reactions from the rest of the world.
Iran has already responded to Washington's demands, with President Rouhani warning America has no right to tell Tehran what to do. He went on to say that the world will no longer cave to Washington's bullying. Commenting on Pompeo's insistence that Iran withdraw from Syria, Tehran said its forces will stay there as long as needed to fight terror.
As long as there is the need, the threat of terror, and the Syrian government wants it, Iran will continue its support of the Syrian government. Let me underline that those who entered Syrian territory without the consent of its government are the ones who need to get out.
Before I said that US-Iran strategy depends on US Middle East policies. Trump followed his new Middle East policy because Arab Spring was ended. President Trump established a new conflict axis with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Israel, and Egypt in the Middle East. They are against Iran. This axis is against Iran, against Turkey, and against Muslim Brotherhood. So Trump established the new balance of conflict in the Middle East, and it is working. After Trump's decisions to withdraw from the deal, the tension between US and Iran was rising. I want to show this video, please.
We need to put an end for this. This cannot happen without a proper regional process that includes everybody.
In securing the region, regional countries cannot go it alone.
After the Trump's decisions to withdraw from the deal, the tension between US and Iran was rising, as you know. Trump administration increased sanctions on Iran, called the maximum pressure campaign. And this is mostly on the oil industry in Iran. And the maximum pressure campaign is harming Iran, devastating its economy very much. And maximum pressure campaign is working, but it has several conflict risks in the Middle East. As you know, the Iran strikes on the American drone in June. The Iranian strikes on oil tankers in the Straits of Hormuz also in June. And then attacks on the Saudi Arabia oil fields in September. What is interesting about these three events in June, after the downing of the American drone, President Trump was ready to attack Iran. Attack in Iran in retaliation for that strike. He pulled back at the last minute. And from my assessment, I will say that not having military response to these particular events emboldened, Iran coupled that with the very open speech of the president that we would want to pull out of the Middle East, and it has definitely given Iran a reason to try to test what US red lines are in the region. Well, they pushed what I would say are red lines. So in December, the attack on the Iraqi base, and American contractor wounding American soldiers definitely started leading to what US red line would be. And then, of course, the protest at the US Embassy, coupled with destruction of the reception room, clearly was a red line. I think that hitting Soleimani, Qasem Soleimani, General Qasem Soleimani, was definitely big symbolic message to Iran. Iran couldn't not given enough response. As you know, it fired missiles at American bases in Iraq, and no one even died. I want to show a video. Look at this, please.
Last night, at my direction, the United States military successfully executed a flawless precision strike that killed the #1 terrorist anywhere in the world, Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani was plotting imminent and sinister attacks on American diplomats and military personnel, but we caught him in the act and terminated him. For years, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its ruthless Quds Force under Soleimani's leadership has targeted, injured, and murdered hundreds of American civilians and servicemen. The recent attacks on US targets in Iraq, including rocket strikes that killed an American and injured 4 American servicemen very badly, as well as a violent assault on our embassy in Baghdad, were carried out at the direction of Soleimani. Soleimani made the death of innocent people his sick passion, contributing to terrorist plots as far away as New Delhi and London. Soleimani has been perpetrating acts of terror to destabilize the Middle East for the last 20 years. What the United States did yesterday should have been done long ago. A lot of lives would have been saved. Just recently, Soleimani led the brutal repression of protesters in Iran, where more than 1,000 innocent civilians were tortured and killed by their own government. We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war. We do not seek regime change. However, the Iranian regime's aggression in the region, including the use of proxy fighters to destabilize its neighbors, must end, and it must end now. The future belongs to the people of Iran, those who seek peaceful coexistence and cooperation, not the terrorist warlords who plunder their nation to finance bloodshed abroad. If Americans anywhere are threatened, we have all of those targets already fully identified, and I am ready and prepared to take whatever action is necessary. And that in particular refers to Iran.
As you know, Trump lost presidential election, so Biden term is important. Biden said several times that if elected, I will return nuclear deal with Iran. I don't see an immediate return to JCPOA. We are going to see from the Biden administration picking up. I think that it is too hard to do in the first 6 months, particularly given the fact that some of the Biden folks are actually some of the Obama folks recast. We have the transition team now. We know who is been advising Biden on foreign policy. In that regard, we need to pay attention to who does folks. I think that it is the desired outcome for a potential Biden administration at last for the first 6 months, because you have heard them say in the first 100 days they want to return to a deal, and this is the vehicle that they would have to use a freeze for freeze, not to solve the Iranian nuclear issue, but to cap it, and that capping is a national security goal that is achieved in this own right, and then how to build on that capping is going to be the challenge for the Biden administration moving ahead, so that I think what they want now, what are the impediment to getting what they want, they are plenty. There is a lot of things that I have a video I want to show that, look at please, after I will continue.
6 months ago, here in New York City, I made the case that Donald Trump was dangerously incompetent and incapable of world leadership. In the past few days, in the wake of the killing of the Iranian General Soleimani, I think Donald Trump has proven beyond that comment beyond dispute. Folks, in wake of such an enormous escalation that has exploded geopolitics in the region and put the United States and Iran on a collision course, that what would we expect from an American president? Well, what have we heard from President Trump? We have not heard a sober-minded explanation to reassure the American people that this decision and its consequences were thought through. No level-headed words meant to dial down the tensions and to take us off the path of conflict. President Trump has no strategy here, it seems to me. He has no end game. And here's the hardest truth of all. His constant mistakes and poor decision-making have left us, the United States, with a severely limited slate of options for how to move forward. And most of those options are now bad. He should be immediately reaching out to our European partners and others and send private signals of deterrence and de-escalation to Iran and find a way to avoid the onrush of war. And the best way to do that, of course, would be for President Trump to rejoin the Iran deal and build on it. If Iran moves back in compliance with the obligations and reestablishes international consensus about how to confront these threats in Iran, we'll be much, much better off. The only way out of this crisis is through diplomacy. Clear-eyed, hard-nosed diplomacy grounded in a strategy that's not about one-off decisions and one-upsmanship. Diplomacy that's designed to de-escalate the crisis, protect our people, and secure our regional interest, including our counter-ISIS campaign. No one wants war, but it's going to take hard work to make sure we don't end up there by accident.
Yes, Trump.
Hey, NBC News viewer.
Trump lost election, but Trump's maximum pressure campaign continues. Unless we forget it is a campaign that is easy to continue because it is non-kinetic, right? There is no military action. Being the primary tool is economic. And we saw that with the post-GCPOA and effective Iranian economy. Finally, I could say that Iran will have to sit negotiation table with US. This is important issue in this tension I want to talk about this issue. Fahrizadeh assassination. I have a video. Look at this, please. After Fahrizadeh assassination, Iranian newspaper, Keyhan Vatan Emruz, and other newspapers. It is the second high-profile assassination of an Iranian since January. After a US airstrike killed Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad, Iranian officials suspect coordination between Israel and the US in that attack. The killing of Mohsin Fakhrizadeh was designed to undermine the possibility of a quick US-Iran detente come January 2021. The top scientist killing may not set back Iran's technical capabilities, but it could weaken and humiliate the moderate Iranian factions that are most open to approachment with a new US administration. As conclusion, I said that the tension between US and Iran started after the Iranian Islamic Revolution. They became, as I said that, they became ontological enemies in 1979. After revolution, their relations entered detente, confrontation, crisis circle. You can see Bush term, confrontation term, Obama detente term, and Trump term is confrontation crisis term. Finally, Biden term is expectation of detente. Thank you for listening to me. Do you have any question? My assistant sent some question. First of all, I can read them. First question is that how affected Soleimani and Fakhrizadeh assassinations Iran's domestic politics? First of all, I can say that the collapse of the JPOE has given Iranian hardliners renewed confidence and impetus in their pursuit of recapturing the presidency. Hardliners are rising in Iran's domestic politics. Iranians think that the US hit us, Israel hit us. Being agreeable is not the solution. We have to hit them. So hardliners are rising. A second question is that do you think Trump wants to go to a war with Iran before he left? I think that Trump wanted to sabotage against Iranian nuclear facilities, but there is a short period of time. But Trump administration can do a lot of damage, and that's by introduction new sanctions to try to make it much more politically difficult for the Biden administration to re-engage Iran and re-enter the JCPOA. So I think that there is a short period of time, 20 days. It is not enough. Other question. Other question is that US and Israel have nuclear weapons. Why don't they want Iran to have nuclear weapons? Do you believe that Iran wants to have nuclear weapons? First of all, I think that Iran wants to have nuclear weapons. I believe that because Iran feels threatened by US. US is great power. Iran is not. If Iran has nuclear weapons, it can keep safe its regime security and national security. So US and Israel don't want to see nuclear Iran because of them. I think Iran wants to make nuclear weapons. Other question is that, last question. Other question is that how will affect Biden administration Middle East policies? He started to affect them. You can see some change in the Middle East. For example, Saudi Arabia and Israel want to have better relations with Turkey, good relations with Turkey. They see Turkey as a balancer against Iran in the Middle East. I want to show this video timeline. Thank you for listening. See you next events. Bye bye.